Good Saturday morning, everyone. Today on Perspective, we're going to dispel some of the myths and present you with the facts on human trafficking in the United States as well as here on the Gulf Coast. To many, the face of human trafficking are the news reports from our borders, video of Border Patrol officers, and truckloads of frightened people who are being smuggled into the U.S., usually in the most horrible of conditions. But human trafficking is so much more. Now, here in the United States, there are three kinds of trafficking that rarely make the headlines, and that is family or familiar trafficking, gang-related trafficking, and pimp-related trafficking as well. Now, here are some of those disturbing facts. Human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, and coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. Economic sectors that profit the most from human trafficking are agriculture, restaurants, manufacturing, domestic work, entertainment, hospitality, and the commercial sex industry. Fact, officials say that 61% of the traffickers here in the United States are mothers. Now, another major concern, who is the most vulnerable? Officials say that populations who have little social and legal protection are the most at risk. The majority are women, 70%. And the risk increases where extreme gender discrimination prevails. Now, knowing the signs and development of human trafficking can be vital in protecting loved ones who are vulnerable to outsiders or relatives who prey on the innocent. Our guests today are Crystal Yarborough, director of the iHeart World program in Mobile and Baldwin County. Also joining us is Brianna Viger, Miss Mobile Bay, who has made human trafficking awareness, in fact, her goal in life. Ms. Viger has a powerful personal testimony as to how close she came to allowing herself into the clutches of a human predator. Human trafficking, the myths and the facts, when Perspectives continues after this quick break. Our guest this morning, Crystal Yarborough. She is the program director of iHeart World. As we talk this morning, Crystal, about human trafficking. This is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and it's said, though, that millions of men, women, and children are trafficked every year throughout the world, especially here in the United States, and of course, even here along the Gulf Coast in Alabama and Florida. Give us an idea this morning exactly how serious a problem is it where we are.
Thank you so much for having me again, Eric. It is a problem, not just here in Mobile and Baldwin counties, but like you said, all along the Gulf Coast. Anywhere that there's an interstate, anywhere that there is a demand, there's a supply. In the last year, as we know with COVID, we have seen our numbers, our referrals increase exponentially, especially for minors. So we have a lot of familial trafficking, we have a lot of gang-related trafficking, and obviously pimp-related trafficking.
Give us an example of how you would define human trafficking, because we're talking about men, women, and children. What's the definition for that word?
So the statute says that human trafficking for an adult is a person who is sold for sex using force, fraud, or coercion. The law also says that when it pertains to a child, the elements of force, fraud, or coercion do not have to be present. Another just really simple definition is it's the exchange of any sex act for anything of value.
So I guess one of the questions for a lot of people is, how does it happen? How does the human trafficker find people who are in the situation to where they can be preyed upon?
That is probably one of the biggest myths that we work really hard to stop the perpetuation of this myth, is that kidnappers or that traffickers kidnap their victims in order to traffic them. And it's just not what we see in the United States. I can tell you that as an organization, in over 10 years, we've never had a person who that was the case. And I've been with the organization for over 5 years, and I've never seen it to be be the case. So it's a process of grooming. It's a process of taking a person, a young person, and finding a vulnerability in that person and exploiting it. So there's a grooming phase, there's a honeymoon phase, it's befriending, it's becoming a confidant, and then gaining the trust of that individual. And once you do that, then the isolation begins. So being able to remove the parents, the friends, anyone else in the person's life who has been their support system. And then the trafficker becomes that person's biggest cheerleader. The trafficker becomes the person who helps supply their needs. And once they gain their trust, then the exploitation begins.
So definitely it's somebody who could be in the midst of a family situation, or they could be someone who works with young people and they see people who are vulnerable. Are they looking to remove them from that environment, or does it happen where they may be trafficked right there in their community? So
both. There are instances where they're removed. If they can, it depends on what the person's home life is like, and there are so many vulnerable youth, and they have a history of running away. And if they cannot be successful, if the trafficker cannot successfully facilitate it in their home, then the person will run away. But if we're talking about an adult, usually once the trafficker gains control over the person, it's just a matter of moving them into their environment. But there are also situations where, like we said, familial trafficking. What we know statistically is that when a person, when there's familial trafficking, 61% of the person who's facilitating the trafficker is the mother, which is an astonishing statistic. And so in that case, those children are less likely to speak out, and they're less likely to run away, which goes against the kind of stereotype that we have in our mind. And I think that's one of the biggest things is we have this idea, I don't know if you remember, like as a kid growing up, it's like there's the big bad wolf, and there's the devil, runs around with a pitchfork, and he's just really, really terrible looking. He's very scary, and you're going to know if you see something, if you see the devil, you're going to know to run from him, or the big bad wolf. And so we kind of think about traffickers that way. Well, if I just teach my child, this person's going to be scary, and this person is going to harm you, and my child's going to know to run. But the fact is, that's the exact opposite. The trafficker is going to come as the sweetest person your son or daughter has ever met. The trafficker is going to come buying gifts that possibly you can't afford to buy for that child. They're going to come and they're going to lift up that child and fill in those gaps, because all children in development are yearning to belong somewhere. It's part of our Maslow's hierarchy of, as we develop cognitively, we need a sense of belonging. And if a person doesn't have that, adult or child, they don't have that, and the trafficker comes along and all of a sudden they give them a place to belong. And so traffickers and those who are trafficked are in our midst. And we just have this stereotype that we're going to know them and we're going to be able to point them out. But the reality is we don't and we can't. They are among us.
So when you share these type of scenarios, how does one protect their child when you are concerned and trying to give your child or your teenager those warnings of what to look out for, who to look out for?
So a couple of things that we have just found and they're hard. They're hard to do, and because we have this tendency to say, okay, well, you can't do this, I'm going to monitor this, I'm going to know everything. Not that those things are not important, but one of the biggest things we can do is to know our children. And when I say know them, I mean know where they're vulnerable. Listen to them. Ask them questions. Just know any person they're becoming friends with, but not in a way that is going to scare them so that they stop telling us. We need to, as parents, increase our capacity to hear hard things from our kids, because they're going to test us with a little bit of information. If we freak out, or if we just completely remove every bit of anything from them, ground them forever, then they're not going to say anything. They learn that they can't trust us with it. So get to know your child, and also admitting areas where my family might be vulnerable specifically. So again, we kind of want to put these kids in a box, right? They're the kids who get in trouble, who are most prone, or they're the socioeconomically disadvantaged. And while that is true, you'll see, in just a little bit that that's not always the case, right? So they don't fit a mold, they don't fit a stereotype. So divorce is a major factor, and it changes a child's life forever. So does that make my child susceptible to the wrong person coming in and filling their needs and making them susceptible to abuse? It does. So really being able to look at our family and recognize areas where maybe there are gaps for our children, where our family might allow our child to be vulnerable. Those are hard things.
Right.
Yes, the monitoring, but also taking a look at it. And then I would also say investing in the kids, other families who are also vulnerable, ones that are vulnerable.
Crystal, take about 30 seconds. You mentioned it initially about the interstate being one of the vehicles, and we are around a interstate corridor that goes east-west with Interstate 10 and, of course, north-south with I-65. And noticing the list of cities, Atlanta and Houston are two of the top 10 cities are considered hotspots for trafficking. Does that play a role in what's happening here where we are?
It does. So Alabama is what we refer to as a transit state. We have two major interstates. We have I-65 that runs north and south in Mobile, intersects in Mobile, goes all the way up to Gary, Indiana, and ends here in Mobile. And then we have I-10, which we know goes all the way out to the West Coast. I-10 is the biggest corridor for drugs. Those both intersect. It's easy to pass through Alabama. It's easy to get in and out. Potentially without even drawing any attention to you. So it does make it very, very easy. We also are a tourist. When you look at Baldwin County, we're a tourist destination.
Right. Crystal, we're going to take a break at this point, and when we come back, we're going to talk more, as well as meet another guest that is joining you this morning, who has had an experience and now working toward publicizing and exposing this whole human trafficking issue. That and more coming up next on Perspectives. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Perspectives. This morning we're talking about human trafficking. This month, January, is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And our guest today, Crystal Yarborough, she is the program director of iHeartWorld. And joining us in this segment, Miss Brianna Viger, who is Miss Mobile Bay, and not here just to talk about the campaign for her platform, but most importantly, human trafficking awareness, which is a part of her actual platform as well. Before we get Brianna in here, Crystal, one more question as relates to myth versus fact. Was there another major point you wanted to share with us before we move on?
Just in January, each week we will take a large myth and dispel it on our social media. So on our Facebook and Instagram page, we'll do a blog post, and we'll start it off with an interview with Brianna, and the myth being that traffickers kidnap their victims.
And on that point, Brianna, we'll bring you in here to share how this became a part of your platform, but most importantly, what happened and you had to deal with.
So those who do not know, whenever I was in middle school, I was approached by an online predator, which is something that we have not talked about in this interview yet, which it's become so prevalent whenever we talk about COVID-19 and how it has affected human trafficking in general. Every kid in the U.S. right now has had a device shoved in their face with no regulations on what to do and how to use it properly. And And whenever I was in middle school, I was approached by an online predator, and it led to me almost being trafficked in Las Vegas. Thank God that is not my story to tell today, but it has become such an important statement for me to share in raising awareness and just educating not only parents but also young adults and teens and just children who have devices and have the internet, because whenever we give children a device, we do not understand that we are giving them just the access of the world.
How simple was it in their approach? How did they do that to where you felt comfortable with that individual initially?
So in 6th grade, I started a new school at Sims Middle School, and I was voted to be class representative. And so during that time, I was adding new people on social media. I was getting new numbers. I wasn't really paying attention to who I was befriending. If I saw that it looked like a normal Instagram account, I was just accepting it. And little to my knowledge that I had accepted a 25-year-old. He was based out of California, and he found a vulnerability of mine and just preyed on that. And it lasted for about 3 years before it came to light. But it was just simple as a, hey, how was your day today? And the conversation was normal, and then it suddenly just took a 180 turn, and it was more grotesque. I won't go into details, but it's just that simple initial trust that these predators need, and then they just take it and they run with it.
It's so important that someone your age now sharing about that very vulnerable age group, the middle school and junior high school age kids, and where a lot of issues that we want to address. What do you tell parents who are concerned, especially when they hear your story and they know that there are dangers with the computer and the internet? What do you tell them as far as those little telltale signs to look for?
As parents, I know that that conversation is not an easy one to have. It was certainly not an easy one for me to have with my parents, but education is key. I like to use the analogy of whenever our kids are old enough to start driving a vehicle, we don't just hand them the keys and say, good luck. We don't say that. We give them the proper training. We let them go through driver's ed and school. And that's why I have made it a point to work with local law enforcement and government officials to establish education in the classroom on how to properly use a device. And whenever we allow our kids to drive a vehicle, we know that their lives are at risk. It's the same aspect whenever you give them a device. I find it terrifying that a 3-year-old child could work a tablet better than I can. And that just speaks to what our society is moving towards. And there's a disconnect between parents and kids right now whenever it comes to technology. So as a parent, it is your duty to become educated, know what your kids are. Whenever it comes to social media, find out what their profiles are, what they're posting, who they're friends with. It's okay to get in their business. You're their parent. You have to keep them safe. And I understand that you want to give them a sense of privacy, but at the same time, these are your kids. These predators no longer have to find your kid outside of their home. They're making their way into your home without you even noticing it.
And to follow up, one quick question about your situation. How did you get out of it? Was it only something that you did yourself, or did you have help to get away from that potential situation?
I believe that God was looking out for me. My mom can attest to the fact that she couldn't sleep one night, and she just had this pressure to go into my room. And during that night, whenever she went into my room, I had a full face of makeup on. It was 12 o'clock at night. And she asked me, what are you doing up so late? And immediately I was on my phone. I turned my phone down. And I said, nothing, I just can't sleep. And at that point, she started noticing red flags. 1, why was I in a full face of makeup? 2, why was I immediately turning my phone over as soon as she walked in the door? And so she walked up to me, put her hand out and said, give me your phone. And at that point, I have nothing else but to give my mother my phone. And so whenever I did, she realized the conversations that I was having with the grown man, and everything came to light, which I truly believe that God was looking out for me that night, because the situation over the past 3 years were just getting worse and worse and worse, and he was finding his way to get to me.
We thank you so much for sharing that information this morning, and of course it being a part of your platform for Miss Mobile Bay. As we close up here, Crystal, tell us how people can reach out to your organization for help or concern, and of course just information on what they should be doing for their children.
Thank you, Eric. And Brianna's story is unfortunately so very typical of traffickers in that. So when we say like know your children, her mother knew her behaviors. She knew that wasn't typical. So we actually go into the schools. We have a prevention, and we also have an intervention curriculum where we go into the juvenile detention centers and work with not only at-risk teens but those who are vulnerable. And like Brianna mentioned, right now every kid they're required to be in front of a computer. So oftentimes parents are at work, or they're busy, they're working. Those parents who still have jobs right now during COVID are trying really hard to keep their jobs. And so those things get overlooked, but the average age right now of a young boy being introduced to pornography is 8 years old. And that's a very scary fact. But our website is iheartworld.org. Each week in January, we will dispel a prevalent human trafficking myth.
Crystal Yarborough, Program Director for iHeartWorld, and of course, Brianna Viger, we thank you both, ladies, for sharing information today, and what you have done today will definitely make a difference in the lives of men, women, and children here locally and around our nation. Thank you again for being on Perspectives this morning.
Thank you.
For more information about iHeartWorld Alabama, you can call Crystal Yarborough at 251-753-2404 or check out the website at iHeartWorld.org. Now, iHeartWorld has offices in Mobile and in Wisconsin. The website has information about prevention, awareness, and even aftercare for victims of human trafficking. The Mobile location has its own Facebook page as well that offers insight into some of the issues facing the Gulf Coast and Alabama. Now, there's also a new post almost daily with information designed to help victims and to raise awareness. Now, if you or someone you know is a victim of human trafficking, listen closely to this information. If possible, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline that you see there on the screen. The number to call, 888-373-7888. You can also visit their website or text Be Free. It is all confidential. Well, according to the Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience physical violence by their intimate partner at some point during their lifetimes. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is presenting even more difficult challenges for the victims and the agencies that provide them services and support. Now, next Saturday morning on Perspectives, we'll hear from officials who work daily to prevent and stop domestic violence in our community. Penelope House represents the hope that it's possible to make a difference and help bring change for the better for the victims and their families. Well, please join us here next Saturday morning at 9 a.m. for Perspectives as we discuss important issues and seek solutions. Now, if you have any ideas of topics you'd like for us to address, just drop it to us here at perspectives@fox10tv.com. I'm Eric Reynolds. Have a great week.
Thanks for watching Fox 10 News. Watch us live wherever you are on our mobile, our streaming news app, and you can also watch us on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV.